This series was produced by Don Ashford and originally aired on KTRT FM 97.5 in the Methow Valley. My thanks to Don Ashford and Diana Hotell for the privilege of making these stories available on Voices of the Methow. Enjoy!
All right, it's time for a segment of The Whole Damn Valley by Diana Hotell. These are stories that she collected back in the 70s and 80s for the newspapers and so on. And a lot of the folks still around at that point in time were ranchers. And ranching nowadays is a little bit different. We still do have some, but not to the extent that we used to. So here's a little ranching story. Diana?
Floyd and Vic Boesel Remember, written in 1981 for the Methow Valley News. Put two brothers in their 60s in the same room to talk about their lives, and they might agree so seldom the past would fog in. But that wasn't true about Floyd and Vic Boesel. They allowed each other the benefit of their own quirks of memory and told their individual but often neatly parallel lives. Oh, there were one or two raucous moments in the course of the morning's interview. A problem about Floyd's birthplace arose almost immediately. I was born in 1911 in a house on the main street in Winthrop, Floyd began, settling back into his easy chair. I wonder if you weren't born at Patterson Lake when the folks lived up there and Dad worked at the sawmill, countered Vic. Floyd looked puzzled. At least I got the impression I was born in Winthrop, he said. Maybe you were born on the road, Vic concluded, and they left it at that. Later, when Vic was on the phone, Floyd was quietly recalling how many cows each of them had to milk before school when they lived on the Falls Creek homestead. Vic had to milk 4, Floyd calculated. I milked 6, Vic shouted clearly and dogmatically from 2 rooms away. Once, when I wasn't much bigger than a peanut, Vic went on, and we were riding home from school, the saddle wasn't cinched up tight, and we must have shifted at the same time because all of a sudden we were both looking up under the belly of the horse, just stuck on there. I don't remember that, said Floyd, unperturbed.
So, there you have it. A lot of the folks still around at that point in time were ranchers. And ranching nowadays is a little bit different. We still do have some, but not to the extent that we used to. So here's a little ranching story. Diana?
George Moore, Cowman, March of 1987, for the Wenatchee World. Arthritis may have taken the spring from his gait, but you'll never find him sitting when there's work to do. If you catch him leaning on the shovel, he's not frittering away anyone's tax dollars. He's just patiently waiting for the ditch water to run the direction he wants it to. George Moore, 65, lean and slightly bent, keeps on the move because he raises cattle. His partner is his mother, Millie Bagwell, 82. George never looks as if the next valley over holds more promise than the one he's in. In him, there's a stillness born, I guess, of years spent around animals and alfalfa, things that take their own sweet time growing. I'm often in their house buying eggs or milk. When no one's home, I walk in the door, get what I want out of the refrigerator, and leave money, making change from a little dish on the cupboard shelf. I find them home more often in the winter, sitting by the wood heater, well-read newspaper set aside on the oilcloth tabletop. Millie, at rest, sunk deep into the easy chair beside the stove, is a study in perfect relaxation. She's never needed therapy to learn how to do that. In summer, their workload increases dramatically. I often see them driving their brown pickup through the valley, tending to their widely distributed herd, pastured on the best grass they can find. Often the appearance of that calf-hauling vehicle resembles a cake with chocolate frosting drizzled down the sides. If that analogy is too sweet, let's just say they'd never have to lock their doors in Seattle. Growing up on Potato Creek near Entiat, George never spent time mooning about the city's bright lights, but would often grab a blanket, a rifle, and some grub and hike into the hills for a few days' communion with the land. Between boyhood and now, George worked a number of jobs, from firing boilers in Colorado to helping dig Leavenworth's first sewer system. To his grandchildren, though, he'd recommend the ranching life. George had plenty of good things to say about it. You don't have to punch a time clock. There's something new happening all the time. Animals are interesting. They're always trying to outguess you. For dumb brutes, they're pretty damn smart, said George. They don't talk back either. That way you think you know who's boss. And you're not cooped up inside. George knows the valley is changing, but his insides aren't all tied up in knots about it. If there's more traffic when he herds his cows to and from pasture, well, that's just the way it is. The cattle market has been lousy the last few years. Sure it has, George shrugged, but what are you going to do about it? It looks as if George will never quit. If I sat down for a winter, I'd never move again, said the rheumatoid arthritic. If all I did was watch TV, I'd be dead within a year. I'll stay with the cattle till I drop in my tracks. That's as good a way to go as any. If $100,000 suddenly rained down from the ceiling into his lap, the only thing he'd do differently would be to take a sightseeing trip to Alaska. You don't just drop everything because of a windfall. You don't just walk out of the barnyard and let the calves fend for themselves. Besides, he gets attached. We walked out to the barn to take a look at several newborn calves. In the sweet, hay-smelling barn, George sauntered over to the pen, leaned on the barrier, and said, "Hi, kids." The calves looked up. "Hiya, George," they grinned.
There you have it. All right, it's time for an episode of The Whole Damn Valley. Stories from Diana Hottells' book of the same name. I asked Diana about her book.
These stories form a mosaic of a place far from any interstate. They paint a portrait of a sequestered valley decades ago, full of strong characters who spoke out about what it was like to make a living in this remoteness. Many of the old-timers in these stories are dead. Many of the concerns and issues are forgotten. What was vibrantly current is now ignored. But there are also many people who are still here, changing with the times, and some concerns never die. For many, this place is still a refuge from the crowded and frantic world beyond its mountainous borders, and the gold each seeks is of an individual shape and hue. The human race still possesses at least a few redeeming qualities. It is for those who would care to plumb the depths of the place they've chosen to call home. There is still no doubt in my mind that this is a special place, even a sacred one. To recall and listen to those who have come before us is to add more texture to the fabric of our own lives. I agree with Ronald Blythe, who wrote Aikenfield, a portrait of an English village, in 1969. He said, "I think my view of human life is how brief and curious most people's lives are. Yet when you come to talk to them, you realize how strong they are and how unbelievably rich their lives are. Also, subtle and various."
All right, let's hear one of these stories.
This story is about rancher Guy Vinton, written for the Methow Valley News in September of 1980. Heading east out of Carlton, winding up the dirt road past Sage and Ponderosa, the green swatch of bottomland along the river disappears in the folds of the dry, seemingly inhospitable foothills. This land once lay buried under hundreds of feet of blue glacier during the Ice Age. Despair could come easily to the faint-hearted in such terrain. But suddenly the land springs to life. Alfalfa and head-high corn burst from the stubborn soil, yanked out only by one thing, unrelenting work. The road stops dead between the sheds of machinery, the collapsing root cellar, the barn glutted to the eaves with hay and stacks of hundreds of more bales outside, and the old weathered home of Guy Vinton and his 3 sons, Dave, Jean, and Tom. Known all over the Methow as the Vinton brothers, the 3 sons carry on a tradition of work during the hay and corn harvest that would stagger most mortals conditioned to the 8-hour day. 8 hours? What's that? Demanded Guy, 91-year-old patriarch of Vinton Road. 3 o'clock in the morning until 10 at night. Now that was a day's work when I was riding the range. We didn't know what overtime was them days. I used to think I was quite a man, he rasped. I could put 150-pound wheat sack over my head. Now I can't even lift 20. At almost 92, one should be allowed such failings. After all, he broke every bone on the left side of his body and 2 on his right during his lifetime camaraderie with horses and cattle. An old guy told me soon after we moved here in 1940 that we'd never leave the Methow Valley because we'd never get enough money, he said. It's been 40 years since the prophet's words. For the past 6 years, Guy wintered in California with his daughter and his grandchildren. He would walk them to school in the morning, holding their hands and crossing the streets together. The children trusted this man who had galloped the open hills and rounded up wild horses, who held 1,000 reins and plowed a straight line. Guy admitted the only thing he would change in his life, had he the chance to live it over again, would be to eliminate all the broken bones.
This story, as well as many others from the series, The Whole Damn Valley, taken from the book of the same name by Diana Hottells, which has been published by the Schaefer Museum in Winthrop. The book, The Whole Damn Valley, is available on the Schaefer Museum's webpage, also at the Trails End Bookstore in Winthrop, Ulrich's Pharmacy in Twisp, and the Mazama Store in Mazama.